The crack of the gavel echoed through the Montgomery County courthouse like a gunshot, sealing Nora Blackburn's fate on that sweltering July afternoon in 1876. Dust motes danced in the shafts of sunlight streaming through tall windows as Judge Harrison's voice boomed across the crowded room. The debt stands at $843. The court recognizes the petition of Thomas Blackburn to settle this obligation through the labor contract of his daughter. Nora stood frozen beside her father, her fingers clutching the worn fabric of her calico dress so tightly her knuckles blanched white. At 19 years old, she had never imagined her own family would sell her to cover their mounting debts, a failed harvest, her mother's medical bills, and her father's growing fondness for cards and whiskey had proven a devastating combination. Bidding starts at $900, the auctioneer announced, his voice betraying no emotion at the sale of a human being. Labor contract valid for 3 years or until the debt is satisfied. Nora's eyes remained fixed on her scuffed boots. She refused to meet the gazes of the men who would bid on her as though she were cattle. The thought of becoming someone's servant, or worse, made her stomach twist into knots. 900, called a gravelly voice from the back. 950, countered another. Nora recognized the second voice, Samuel Whitfield, owner of the saloon where her father squandered what little money they had. The man's reputation made her blood run cold. The bidding continued, rising slowly, each increment hammering another nail into the coffin of her freedom. When it reached 1,500, the room fell silent but for Whitfield's triumphant chuckle. Going once, the auctioneer called. Nora's chest tightened. She couldn't breathe. Going twice. $3,000. A collective gasp rippled through the courthouse. Nora's head snapped up, searching for the source of the voice, clear, steady, and unfamiliar. He stood at the back, a tall figure silhouetted against the bright doorway. As he stepped forward, the crowd parted like the Red Sea. Sunlight caught on his brown leather vest and the silver star pinned to it. His dark hair fell just shy of his shoulders, partially hidden beneath a well-worn Stetson. 3,000, the stranger repeated, his blue eyes never leaving Nora's face. Double what anyone else is willing to pay. That's... The auctioneer's voice faltered. That's over 3 times the original debt. I'm aware, the stranger said calmly. Whitfield's face contorted with fury. This is absurd. No labor contract is worth that much. The stranger ignored him, addressing Judge Harrison directly. I'd like to settle this matter immediately. Very well, the judge said, clearly eager to conclude this unusual proceeding. 3,000 going once, going twice. Sold to Sheriff Beau Vaughn. Sheriff. The word sent a flicker of hope through Nora's chest. Perhaps this was a lawman with a conscience. Payment to be rendered immediately, the judge continued. The labor contract will transfer upon completion. Nora's father stepped forward, hand extended greedily toward the sheriff. For the first time in her life, she felt pure hatred toward the man who had raised her. Sheriff Vaughn produced a bank draft, handed it to the court clerk for verification, then approached Nora. Up close, she could see the fine lines at the corners of his eyes. He was older than she'd first thought, perhaps in his late 20s. Miss Blackburn, he said quietly, would you walk with me? She had no choice but to follow him. As they exited the courthouse, whispers trailed behind them like a rattlesnake's warning. The bright sunlight momentarily blinded her, and she raised a hand to shield her eyes. I imagine you have questions, the sheriff said as they descended the courthouse steps. Why did you pay so much? The words tumbled out before she could stop them. He gestured toward a wagon parked nearby. Let's talk somewhere less public. Fear gripped Nora's heart. Perhaps she had misread his intentions. Perhaps the badge meant nothing. Seeming to sense her hesitation, he added, I'm not taking you anywhere against your will, Miss Blackburn. I just thought you might appreciate some privacy for this conversation. She nodded cautiously and climbed into the wagon. Sheriff Vaughn took the reins and guided the horses away from the courthouse, through the dusty streets of Montgomery, and toward the outskirts of town. You still haven't answered my question, Nora said when they had left the bustle of town behind. The sheriff kept his eyes on the road. I paid that much because it was necessary to ensure no one else would. But why? He pulled the wagon to a stop beneath a large cottonwood tree and turned to face her. Because I intend to tear up that contract the moment we reach my office. Nora stared at him, uncomprehending. Tear it up? But you just spent $3,000. Money well spent, in my estimation. He removed his hat, revealing more of his face, earnest, weathered by sun and wind, but kind. No person should be able to buy or sell another. What happened in that courthouse today was wrong. But legal, she said bitterly. Legal doesn't always mean right. He sighed. I've seen too many of these labor contracts turn into something barely distinguishable from slavery. Especially when young women are involved. Understanding dawned on Nora. You mean Whitfield has a history of acquiring female labor contracts, yes? The sheriff's jaw tightened. And those women tend to end up working in his establishment in capacities that have nothing to do with serving drinks. Nora shuddered. So you saved me from that. I aim to, yes. At considerable personal expense. Sheriff Vaughn shrugged. I have savings. No family to spend it on. Nora studied him, searching for any hint of deception, any indication that this rescue came with strings attached. She found none. So what happens now? She asked. If you tear up the contract, I'm free to go? That's right. Go where? My family just sold me to pay their debts. I can hardly return home. The sheriff nodded, as if he'd anticipated this problem. I have a proposition. My sister runs a boarding house on the edge of town. She's always in need of help cooking, cleaning, mending. It's honest work with fair pay, and you'd have a roof over your head. Why would you do all this for a stranger? His eyes held a sadness that suggested experience beyond his years. Let's just say I've seen what happens when good people stand by and do nothing. For the first time since the gavel fell, Nora felt something other than despair. I accept your proposition, Sheriff Vaughn. Beau, he corrected. If we're going to be neighbors of sorts, you might as well use my given name. Beau, she repeated, the name feeling strange on her tongue. And I'm Nora. He smiled then, a genuine expression that transformed his solemn face. Well, Nora, let's get that contract torn up and start you on your new beginning. As they rode toward his office, Nora couldn't help but wonder what twist of fate had brought this unusual man into the courthouse at precisely the right moment. Whatever the reason, she silently thanked God for the first time in months. The sheriff's office was a modest building of weathered timber, with barred windows and a small jail attached to the rear. Inside, a desk stacked with papers dominated the main room, while wanted posters papered one wall. A young deputy looked up from his coffee as they entered. Noah, this is Miss Nora Blackburn. Miss Blackburn, Deputy Noah Wilson. The deputy tipped his hat. Madam. Noah, I need to handle some paperwork. Would you mind checking on the Wilkins boy? Make sure he's sober enough to release. Once the deputy had left, Beau retrieved the labor contract from his vest pocket and spread it on the desk. Without ceremony, he tore it in half, then quarters, then eighths. There, he said, brushing the pieces into the wastebasket. You are beholden to no one. Nora watched the scraps of paper, the physical manifestation of her bondage, disappear. Tears pricked behind her eyes. I don't know how to thank you. You don't need to thank me for doing what any decent person should. He gathered his hat. Now let me introduce you to my sister. I think you'll get along well. Rebecca Vaughn was nothing like her brother. Where Beau was tall and solemn, Rebecca was petite and vivacious, with the same striking blue eyes but a ready smile that her brother seemed to keep in reserve. Her boarding house was immaculate, a 2-story structure with a wide porch and fresh white paint. Another stray, Beau? Rebecca asked when he explained Nora's situation, though there was only kindness in her voice. I prefer to think of her as a new beginning, Beau replied. Rebecca took Nora's hands in her own. Well, you're welcome here, honey. God knows I could use the help. Most of my boarders are railroad men, decent sorts, but with hearty appetites and muddy boots. And so began Nora's new life at the Vaughn boarding house. She worked hard, rising before dawn to help prepare breakfast for the boarders, spending mornings cleaning and afternoons baking or mending. The work was demanding but fair, and for the first time in her life, she earned her own money. Rebecca proved to be both a fair employer and a friend. In the evenings, after the boarders had retired or gone out for entertainment, the two women often sat on the porch, Rebecca teaching Nora to knit or simply talking about their lives. Beau visited regularly, usually for Sunday dinner or sometimes in the evenings after his rounds. Nora found herself looking forward to these visits, eager to hear his deep voice recounting the day's events or discussing books with his sister. As August faded into September, Nora began to notice how Beau's eyes would follow her when he thought she wasn't looking. There was nothing improper in his gaze, only a quiet admiration that made her cheeks warm. One evening in late September, as autumn painted the cottonwoods gold, Beau arrived at the boarding house looking troubled. "Samuel Whitfield's been asking questions about you," he told Nora as they sat on the porch after dinner. "Seems he's not happy about being outbid. Can he do anything about it?" Nora asked, her old fear resurfacing. "Legally? No. The contract's been settled and destroyed. But Whitfield isn't known for respecting legal boundaries when they inconvenience him." Rebecca, who had been listening from the doorway, joined them. "She'll be safe here, Beau. We have a house full of men who'd defend her if necessary. All the same, I'd prefer if Nora didn't go into town alone for a while." His eyes met Nora's. "I don't want to restrict your freedom after everything, but I understand," Nora assured him. "I'll be careful." The weeks passed, and as Whitfield's interest seemed to wane, Nora's life fell into a pleasant rhythm. She found unexpected joy in the small freedoms of her new existence, choosing which ribbon to wear in her hair, deciding how to spend her wages, expressing opinions without fear of her father's disapproval. And always there was Beau. His quiet presence became a comfort, his rare smiles a treasure. When their fingers brushed as he passed her the bread at dinner, the contact sent tingles up her arm. She began to wonder if the flutter in her chest whenever he entered a room might be more than gratitude. October brought the Harvest Festival, and Rebecca insisted that Nora attend, dismissing her concerns about Whitfield. "You can't hide forever," Rebecca said as she helped Nora pin up her hair. "Besides, the whole town will be there. It's the safest place to be." Nora wore a dress of deep blue calico that Rebecca had helped her make, and when Beau arrived to escort them to the festival, his appreciative gaze made her blush to the roots of her hair. The town square had been transformed with hay bales, cornstalk bundles, and paper lanterns strung between trees. A fiddler and banjo player provided music for dancing, while tables groaned under the weight of pies, cakes, and other harvest bounty. For the first time since the courthouse, Nora faced the townsfolk as more than the girl whose father sold her. Some nodded politely, others smiled, and a few even welcomed her warmly as Miss Rebecca's helper. With Beau beside her, a steady presence in his clean shirt and polished boots, Nora began to relax. "Would you care to dance?" Beau asked as the musicians struck up a lively tune. "I'm not very practiced," Nora admitted. "Neither am I," he said with a smile. "We can be unpracticed together." His hand at her waist was warm and strong as he led her through the steps. They moved awkwardly at first, stepping on each other's toes and laughing, but soon found their rhythm. When the music slowed to a waltz, Beau drew her closer, and Nora felt as though the rest of the world had fallen away. "You look beautiful tonight," he murmured, his voice barely audible above the music. Nora's heart pounded so loudly she was certain he must hear it. "Thank you for bringing me here. For everything." The moment shattered at the sound of raised voices. Beau's head turned sharply toward the disturbance, and Nora followed his gaze to see Samuel Whitfield, clearly drunk, arguing with one of the town councilmen. "Wait here," Beau said, releasing her and moving toward the confrontation. Nora retreated to Rebecca's side, watching anxiously as Beau approached Whitfield. The saloon owner's face darkened at the sight of the sheriff, and though Nora couldn't hear the words exchanged, the hostility was palpable even from a distance. After several tense moments, Whitfield spat on the ground near Beau's boots, then turned and stalked away from the festival. Beau returned to Nora and Rebecca, his expression grim. "What happened?" Rebecca asked. "Nothing that won't keep till morning," Beau replied, but the tension in his jaw suggested otherwise. The rest of the evening passed pleasantly enough, but the earlier warmth between Nora and Beau had been replaced by a watchfulness on his part. His eyes scanned the crowd continuously, and he positioned himself so that Nora was always within his sight. When they returned to the boarding house, Beau insisted on checking every room before leaving. At the door, he hesitated. "Lock this behind me," he told Rebecca. "I'll have Noah keep an eye on the place tonight." "You're worrying me, Beau," Rebecca said. "What did Whitfield say to you?" Beau's eyes flicked to Nora, then back to his sister. "Just drunk talk. But I'd rather be cautious." After he left, Rebecca secured the door and turned to Nora with a sigh. "That brother of mine needs to learn the difference between being protective and being overprotective." But Nora had seen the concern in Beau's eyes. "I think he knows something he's not telling us." She was right. The next morning, Beau arrived at breakfast time looking as though he hadn't slept. "Whitfield's made threats," he announced without preamble once the boarders had left for work. "Claims I stole what was rightfully his at the auction. Says he's going to take what he paid for, one way or another." Nora felt the blood drain from her face. "He can't. The contract." "This isn't about the contract anymore," Beau said grimly. "This is about his pride. He's telling anyone who'll listen that I only bought your contract to keep you for myself." "That's ridiculous," Rebecca exclaimed. "Everyone knows you're not that sort of man. What people know and what they're willing to believe are often different things." Beau ran a hand through his hair, a gesture Nora had come to recognize as a sign of his frustration. "I've talked to the judge about a restraining order, but without any specific threat or action." "What can we do?" Nora asked, hating the tremor in her voice. Beau's eyes met hers. "For now, stay vigilant. Don't go anywhere alone. I'll increase patrols around the boarding house." For 3 days, Nora jumped at shadows and startled at every unexpected noise. Beau or Deputy Wilson escorted her whenever she needed to leave the boarding house, and the railroad men who boarded there took turns watching the property when they weren't working. On the 4th morning, Nora was alone in the kitchen preparing bread dough while Rebecca went to the market with one of the boarders as escort. She heard the back door open and assumed it was the woodcutter with the delivery Rebecca had ordered. "Just stack it by the stove," she called without turning. "I've got something else for you," came a familiar, dreaded voice. Nora whirled to find Samuel Whitfield standing in her kitchen, his bloodshot eyes and unkempt appearance suggesting he'd been drinking heavily. "You need to leave," Nora said, backing toward the knife block on the counter. "Sheriff Vaughn will be here any minute." Whitfield laughed. "No, he won't. He's halfway to the Anderson Ranch dealing with a cattle dispute." "Planned it that way." Fear rose in Nora's throat like bile. "What do you want?" "What's mine?" He stepped closer. "I bid fair and square for your contract before that self-righteous lawman interfered." "The contract is void," Nora said, her fingers closing around a knife handle. "And I was never yours to claim." Whitfield's face darkened. "You high-minded types always think you're better than everyone else. But money talks in this world, girl, and I paid good money for you. And Sheriff Vaughn paid twice as much to ensure I remained free." Nora pulled the knife from the block, holding it before her. "Now get out of this house." Whitfield's eyes narrowed at the knife. "You think you can threaten me? A slip of a girl against a man? A free woman defending herself against an intruder," Nora corrected, her voice steadier than she felt. He lunged suddenly, faster than she expected from a drunk. His hand clamped around her wrist, squeezing until she gasped and dropped the knife. It clattered to the floor as he twisted her arm behind her back. "We're leaving," he growled in her ear. "And if you scream, I'll make sure you regret it." Nora brought her heel down hard on his instep. Whitfield howled in pain, loosening his grip enough for her to wrench free. She scrambled for the knife, but he recovered quickly, grabbing a handful of her hair and yanking her backward. "You little wildcat!" he snarled, dragging her toward the door. Nora fought with everything she had, kicking, scratching, even biting when his hand came too close to her mouth. They crashed into the table, sending dishes shattering to the floor. Whitfield cursed and slapped her hard across the face, momentarily stunning her. Through her daze, Nora heard the front door bang open and Rebecca's voice calling her name. Whitfield cursed again, pulling Nora against him as a shield just as Rebecca appeared in the kitchen doorway. "Let her go, Whitfield!" Rebecca demanded, her voice remarkably calm despite the terror in her eyes. "Stay back," he warned, backing toward the rear door with Nora in his grasp. "This doesn't concern you." "I've already sent for Beau," Rebecca said. "He'll be here any minute." "You're lying." But uncertainty had crept into Whitfield's voice. As if in answer to his doubt, the sound of hoofbeats approached rapidly. Whitfield's grip tightened painfully around Nora's waist. "I'm not going to jail over some debt-ridden farmer's daughter," he hissed, shoving Nora toward Rebecca with enough force to send both women stumbling. He bolted through the back door just as Beau burst through the front, gun drawn. "He went out the back," Rebecca cried, steadying herself and Nora. Beau took in the scene with one glance: the overturned table, broken dishes, and most significantly, the angry red mark blooming on Nora's cheek. His expression hardened to granite. "Stay here," he ordered, then disappeared through the kitchen in pursuit. Rebecca guided Nora to a chair, examining her face with gentle fingers. "Are you hurt anywhere else?" Nora shook her head, though her wrist throbbed where Whitfield had gripped it, and her scalp stung from his pulling her hair. "How did Beau know to come?" "He didn't. He was just coming for lunch like he always does on Thursdays." Rebecca's hands trembled slightly as she wet a cloth to press against Nora's cheek. "Thank God for his predictable habits." Outside, a gunshot cracked the air. Both women froze, eyes locked in shared fear. Then another shot, followed by a shout they couldn't make out. "Stay here," Rebecca said, echoing her brother's command as she moved toward the door. But Nora couldn't remain seated, not knowing whether Beau was alive or hurt. She followed Rebecca onto the back porch just in time to see Deputy Wilson riding up, with two other men close behind. In the distance, Beau was walking back toward the house, his gun holstered, his stride purposeful. There was no sign of Whitfield. "Beau?" Rebecca called anxiously. "I'm fine," he replied, his voice carrying across the yard. "Wilson, take 2 men and head east along the creek. Whitfield's on foot and bleeding." "You shot him?" Nora asked as Beau reached the porch. "Grazed his leg when he wouldn't stop running." Beau's eyes surveyed her face, lingering on the mark Whitfield had left. His jaw tightened. "I should have been here sooner." "You couldn't have known," Rebecca said. "I should have anticipated it." Beau's self-recrimination was palpable. "I knew he was escalating, becoming more unpredictable." "This isn't your fault," Nora insisted. "You can't be everywhere at once." His expression softened slightly. "Are you all right?" "The truth, now. I'll have some bruises, but I'm not seriously hurt." She managed a weak smile. "And I'm fairly certain I broke his toe." That earned her a brief, reluctant smile in return before Beau's expression grew serious again. "Once we catch him, he'll go to jail for assault and attempted kidnapping. But that might not be the end of it. He has friends, connections." "What are you saying?" Rebecca asked. Beau hesitated. "I'm saying it might be safer for Nora to leave Montgomery for a while. At least until this blows over." Nora's heart sank. She had finally found a place where she belonged, people who cared about her. The thought of leaving was like a physical pain. "Where would I go?" Beau and Rebecca exchanged a look that suggested they had already discussed this possibility. I have a friend, Beau said slowly. Jack Miller. He owns a ranch about 100 miles north of here. He's a good man, always looking for help, and he'd keep you safe. 100 miles? Nora echoed, dismayed. It would only be temporary, Rebecca hastened to add. Just until Whitfield is dealt with properly. Beau's eyes held Nora's, and she saw in them a conflict she couldn't quite interpret. I wouldn't suggest it if I thought there was any other way to ensure your safety. Later that evening, after Deputy Wilson returned with news that they had captured Whitfield hiding in a farmer's barn, Nora sat alone on the porch swing, contemplating her options. The night was cool, with a million stars scattered across the velvet sky and the scent of autumn leaves in the air. She heard Beau's footsteps before she saw him, steady, measured, as predictable as the man himself. May I join you? He asked, standing at the bottom of the porch steps. Nora nodded, and he climbed the steps to sit beside her on the swing, leaving a respectable distance between them. Whitfield's in custody, Beau said after a moment. The judge has agreed to hold him without bail until trial. That's good news. It is. He paused. It also means you don't need to leave. Not right away, at least. Relief flooded through Nora. I'm glad. I've grown fond of this place. Just the place? There was an unusual note in Beau's voice that made Nora look at him sharply. His eyes were fixed on the horizon, his profile strong in the moonlight. The silence stretched between them, filled with unspoken words. No, Nora finally answered. Not just the place. Beau turned to her then, his expression more open than she had ever seen it. I've been thinking about what Whitfield said about my reasons for buying your contract. You don't need to explain yourself to me. I think I do. He shifted slightly, facing her more directly. I told you I tore up that contract because it was the right thing to do, and that was true. But it wasn't the whole truth. Nora's heart began to race. What was the whole truth? The moment I saw you in that courthouse, standing there with your chin up despite everything, I felt something I couldn't explain. His voice was low, almost hesitant. I told myself I was just doing my duty, protecting someone who needed protection. But these past months, watching you rebuild your life, seeing your strength and kindness. He trailed off, seemingly at a loss for words, an unusual state for a man who always knew exactly what to say. What are you trying to tell me, Beau? Nora asked softly. That I care for you, he said simply. More than I should, perhaps, given the circumstances of our meeting. I've tried to keep my distance, to be honorable about it, but today when I saw Whitfield had hurt you. You wanted to kill him, Nora finished, remembering the look in Beau's eyes. Yes. The admission seemed to cost him. Which isn't the proper response for a lawman sworn to uphold justice. But it might be the proper response for a man protecting a woman he cares for. Their eyes met, and Nora saw in his gaze the same feelings that had been growing in her own heart: tenderness, admiration, and something deeper that made her breath catch. I don't want you to feel obligated in any way, Beau said carefully. I bought your freedom, not your affection. Do you think so little of me that you believe I can't tell the difference between gratitude and... Nora hesitated over the word. And? Beau prompted, a new intensity in his eyes. Love, she whispered. The swing creaked gently as Beau moved closer, his hand finding hers. I never dared hope. When I first met you, I was broken, Nora said, her fingers intertwining with his. Not just because of what happened in that courthouse, but from years before my mother's death, my father's descent into drinking and gambling. You didn't just buy my freedom that day. You gave me a chance to discover who I could be when I wasn't afraid all the time. And who is that? Beau asked, his thumb tracing circles on the back of her hand. A woman who knows her own mind. Who makes her own choices. She met his gaze steadily. A woman who chooses you, if you'll have her. Beau's free hand rose to cup her face, careful of the bruise on her cheek. I'd be honored to be chosen by you, Nora Blackburn. When he kissed her, it was gentle, a question rather than a demand. Nora answered by leaning into him, her hands finding his shoulders as the kiss deepened into something more certain. They were still sitting on the porch swing, talking in low voices, when Rebecca found them an hour later. She took one look at their clasped hands and smiled knowingly. "Well, it's about time," she declared. "I was beginning to think I'd have to lock you two in the root cellar together." Beau cleared his throat, looking embarrassed but not displeased. "We were just discussing the future." "And what does that future hold?" Rebecca asked, her eyes twinkling. Nora and Beau exchanged glances, a new understanding passing between them. "We haven't worked out all the details yet," Nora admitted. "But we know we want to face it together," Beau added. In the end, Samuel Whitfield was sentenced to 5 years in the territorial prison for assault and attempted kidnapping. The saloon passed to his younger brother, who proved to be a more law-abiding citizen. Nora continued working at the boarding house through the winter, but her relationship with Beau flourished in the cold months, evenings by the fire, walks through the snow-covered streets, and long conversations that built the foundation of their future. When spring came, bringing wildflowers and warming breezes, Beau proposed properly, with a small sapphire ring that had belonged to his mother. They married in May 1877, with Rebecca as maid of honor and Deputy Wilson as best man. The entire town turned out for the celebration, curious to witness the union of their sheriff and the woman he had saved from bondage. Thomas Blackburn, Nora's father, appeared at the church uninvited, seeking forgiveness or perhaps money. Nora spoke with him briefly, her head high and Beau at her side. What passed between father and daughter remained private, but when Thomas left town the next day, he did so alone and empty-handed. Beau continued serving as sheriff for 3 more years before deciding that a growing family needed him home more than the town needed his badge. With their savings and a loan from the bank, they purchased a small ranch outside town, nothing grand, but with good water and fertile soil. Rebecca eventually married a widowed pastor with 2 young children, combining their families under one roof at the boarding house, which became renowned throughout the territory for its hospitality and Rebecca's apple pie. On their 5th wedding anniversary, as they sat on the porch of their ranch house watching their twin 3-year-old daughters chase fireflies in the twilight, Nora reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked Beau. "Spending all that money to free a stranger?" Beau's arm tightened around her shoulders. "Best investment I ever made." "Even though you never got a day's labor out of me?" she teased. He laughed, the sound rich in the evening air. "I got something far more valuable." "What's that?" "A partner. A love. A life worth living." His eyes, still as blue as the day she'd first seen them in the courthouse, gazed into hers with unwavering devotion. "Some things can't be measured in dollars and cents." As the sun set over their land, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Nora silently thanked the cruel twist of fate that had once seemed like the end of her world but had instead led her to a love stronger than any contract, more binding than any legal document, a love freely given and freely returned, worth more than all the gold in the territory.